Hi guys, and welcome to A Dog's Soul, an empath's guide to your dog's feelings. Today we're going to talk about how to teach your dog to ignore other dogs. So stay tuned and have fun. Alright, so one of the most common issues with our dogs on walks is that they react in some way or another to other dogs. Some might just want to get there as fast as possible and start pulling like crazy. Some dogs might start barking and lunging and growling and whatever. Some dogs might panic and try to run away. And this is due to a lot of restrictions we have in living with our dogs. The first thing is a leash. So a leash can be very frustrating for a dog, especially when as puppies they have learned that whenever they see another dog, they just run up to that dog and have an awesome time. And as soon as they grow up a little, they have a leash attached to them and they just can't do that anymore. And that's very frustrating. So what happens is at some point the frustration gets too much and they have to yell it out. So that's when we see lunging, barking, and growling in dogs who are actually fine off leash with other dogs. Another very common reason for this behavior is fear. And that's actually more common than frustration, and it's often combined with frustration. And fear doesn't necessarily mean that the dog just takes off whenever he sees another dog. It can just mean that the dog has no real idea of what to do with another dog when he or the other dog or both are on leash. So the situation is making him uncomfortable because he doesn't know how to act in that specific situation, even though off leash he's fine. And that's when we have to help our dogs. Actually, whenever we see something going on like reactivity or fear or whatever we don't want to see, we can take that as a reminder that sometimes our dogs need help. A situation where our dogs are reactive or fearful are not enjoyable for our dogs either. So they don't do that to annoy us or to be a bad dog or anything like that. It's just they are overwhelmed with the situation and they don't know how to act differently. So what helps us most when we see these behaviors take place in a specific context, we can see at what distance does this happen. You probably have heard me say that before because distance is such an important thing, such an important issue, or whatever you want to call it. It's what helps us most and what even makes training possible. So if we start with a dog that is already going cuckoo, it's not likely that that dog will learn much in the situation. When we have enough distance, we can start teaching the dog what we actually want to see. So we have to find out where our dog is still fine, and a lot of people have a feeling for that, but it's not necessary to just feel it. You can see it as well. So you can watch your dog and not in a threatening way or staring at him all the time because that's uncomfortable, but just watch him out of the corner of your eyes, right? And you can see when he starts tensing up. It's different for long-haired dogs, short-haired dogs, different breeds, different body postures, and so on. So every dog is different. Fortunately, when you're not a trainer, you only have to learn your dog. And yes, it helps to also be able to assess the other dog, because there will be situations where your dog is still fine, but the other one is not. And if you go any closer, the other one will react, and that might trigger your dog again. So, but the most important thing is to know your dog. And if that's already no issue anymore, then you can start trying to assess the other dog. So, first, I like to look at the overall dog. Do I sense some kind of tension? Or do I see something like tense muscles in a short coat dog? Or do I see the tail going up or down, depending on where it was in a neutral state? So some dogs have tails that are horizontal. Some dogs have tails that are curled and lying on their back, so this is more difficult, of course. Some dogs have their tails between their legs almost all the time. That's more difficult. So basically, everything that is a change in what your dog usually looks like. And the longer you live with your dog, the faster you will see changes in his normal behavior or his normal body posture. So that's the tail. Also, we can see shifting body weight. If the dog is leaning forward or leaning backward while standing, or starting to pull on the leash a little bit, or the ears are pricked up, then we start seeing tension. Or we can see the hair in the back stand up. Things like that. And these are very strong signs that something's gonna happen, and very often when we see those, we don't have much time to save the situation. So the more subtle the signs are that we are recognizing, the more time we have to save the situation. So some dogs, and again, here every dog is different. Some dogs like to start sniffing a lot to de-escalate a situation. So whenever we are getting close to another dog, and close is a relative term. Close might mean for one dog that we are, 60 feet away, and another dog 100 feet away. So it's very different for each dog. And the first thing we often see is they realize there is another dog, and they shift their attention to that dog. That doesn't necessarily mean that they look at the dog. It often means turning an ear towards that dog, sniffing, doing anything like that. And then we often see de-escalation signals. So again, we have sniffing. Some dogs might look toward the other dog and then back, or start licking their lips, or start looking at things, start doing weird things that we normally don't see in that context. So again, we have a dog that is acting differently or looking differently than when he is completely relaxed. That's our cue. And when we have found out the right distance, we can start training at that distance or even further away. So we start at a distance where the dog is comfortable with the other dog, because we want our dog to learn another dog means nothing. You're still comfortable, you can still do anything else, you don't have to interact with that dog. And the empath's way to do that is to start with a dog who is comfortable in the presence of another dog. Okay? And then we really have to decide what we want to see. A dog who ignores other dogs has to do something else. So, there is an old saying, you cannot not behave, which means you're always doing something. And if it's only looking and breathing, it's still doing something. So, we can either decide if we want our dog to perform some kind of trick or some kind of behavior or whatever, like looking at us sitting there or carrying a toy past the other dog or whatever we would like to see. We could also choose something that comes natural to the dog. So we want our dog to start sniffing, or we want our dog to walk in a curve past the other dog, or we want our dog to check in with us and then choose a different path or more distance or whatever. So whatever we want to see with our dogs, we can start training at the right distance. And again, for me, the most important thing when I do any kind of training, I want it to be fun and I want it to be useful. So if I have a dog who doesn't like to take things in his mouth, it will not be as fun or as useful to teach that dog to carry something past the other dog. It's way harder. Also, if I have a dog who tends to stare at other dogs, I might have it easier to start with that dog staring at me. If he wants to stare at something, he can stare at me. Or I want to address the staring topic from the beginning, and I started to just train taking the eyes off the other dog. And that can be in very, very tiny steps and very fast repetitions, and we can get a lot of success in very, very quickly. As long as we have a training situation that is comfortable for both dogs and for us as the handlers as well. And not everybody has helper dogs at hand. I understand that, and very often I don't have helper dogs at hand as well because I work online a lot. But we can use dog parks, fenced-in dog parks. Those are actually great for such a training because the dogs are mostly interacting with each other or with their people or with the things that are in there and don't pay as much attention to people or dogs outside. Sometimes it's different. Sometimes a group of dogs is in there and bored and they start guarding that space and watching everybody who walks by very closely. Then it's not an easy situation. We can still use it, but it's not as easy. And with a dog who just starts training, we would need a lot of distance with such a group of dogs. But when they are busy with each other and not really paying attention to us, we can start at the distance that's comfortable for our dog and start training whatever we want to see there. We can also use typical walking areas where people have their dogs on leash. Very often, we already know such places because we are avoiding them with our dogs to not have them react. But we can use those routes people usually take with their dogs just from another starting point where we have, again, more distance and distance our dog is comfortable with. So you see, the major takeaway from this is distance. But there is something that is even more important, or not more important, but kind of, equally important. Let's call it equally important. And that is the overall stress level and well-being of the dog. We can never forget that. Whenever we start training with something, we have to make sure that our dog is actually capable of learning at the moment. And I cannot stress this enough. It's so often that I come to a consultation. That's why I do so thorough assessments in the beginning. And there is something I know is important, but might not be as obvious to everybody. So, for example, if we have a dog who has diarrhea 3 times a week, but it's not as bad, if you can call it that even. So the dog's not pooping in the house, but he has diarrhea whenever they are outside. And he scratches his face a lot after eating. It might not even obvious to connect those two, but for me, it's a sign that the dog doesn't feel 100%. Maybe he still acts like his normal self, and he's still fun and joyful and very easy to be around. He doesn't show any unwanted behaviors except for the reactivity. But very often, if there are those small little things and we change those, the reactivity becomes a lot less. Or the excitability, it doesn't always have to be reactivity, right? So even if we have a dog who only pulls on a leash like crazy when he sees another dog, whenever we take the stress level down, and feeling physically uncomfortable is a very intense stressor. So we cannot just ignore that. And I've seen it so many times that people weren't sure if I take them seriously when I start the training process with changing diets because it doesn't seem connected. And maybe changing the day-to-day life a little bit or changing routines a little bit, and then start training for the actual problem if there is an actual problem left. Because sometimes when we change things around and the dog feels more comfortable and gets more rest, the reactivity disappears. It's happened to me before, and sometimes it's really, it looks like magic to the people. I always love that moment because it's such a relief, and very often we see other things disappear that weren't even on the radar at that moment. So, for example, people come to me because the dog is leash reactive, and we change a few things and the reactivity gets a lot better. Maybe it doesn't disappear completely, but it gets better. And suddenly we also see that the humping the dog was doing on a regular basis in the evening stops completely. We didn't even do anything to that, but it just goes away. And this is why it's so important to see the whole training process holistically, to approach it from different angles, to change different things, to try different things, and see what happens. It takes a little bit of being open-minded. I know I have gone through that with my dogs a lot. But the more holistic we go at it, the more sustainable it is in the long run. So we don't want a dog who just holds his breath for as long as he can and then he explodes and the reactivity comes back even worse. We want a dog who learn sustainably how to ignore other dogs. And this is why sometimes we have to think outside the box and look at it from different angles. So, why don't you let me know in the comments or via Instagram Messenger or via email, however you like, how this helps you and your dog with your dog's reactivity. And feel free to share the episode if you know anybody with a reactive dog, which is probably true because there are a lot out there. Share the episode and let's help more people get more peace and quiet on their walks together. This is my mission and I'd love to include you in it. That's it. I wish you an amazing time training, an amazing time with your dog, and we'll see each other next time. Bye.